All right, we are back here getting ready for our fantasy football drafts here on the podcast. Join me today, one of the fantasy football writers from NBC Sports Group, Roto World here. He's a contributor to this magazine. He writes the tiers for fantasy football. Kyle Dvorchak is here. Kyle, welcome. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. It's like every year, football season's really busy for me. It's my job. And then I get a few months off. And the first month, I'm like, oh, this is sick. There's nothing to do. I'm free. All my time is open. And then after like that month and a few more weeks, I'm like, all right, it's pretty boring. Let's get it going. And then training camp hits. I'm like, oh boy, there's a lot of news once again.
Yeah, it's been a lot of news, even on the fantasy front over the last few weeks. I mean, there's a lot going on. And I'm sure, like, writing this magazine, like, in, like, what is it, April you guys are doing this, April, May? It's like, it feels crazy seeing, like, man, I put this in here, no, this stuff might be out of date in, like, a month.
Yeah, which is why if you buy the magazine, we have the online guide, which we can and do update. Like I literally update it daily, if not like multiple times in a day. But yeah, it is wild that like you look back at this magazine, you're like, we really did have some takes back then, didn't we?
So yeah, some takes here. And obviously, I want to start here. If you had the number one pick, I mean, last year, I had the number one pick. I took Jonathan Taylor. Did not go very well for me. Did not make the playoffs in my league. So if you have number one this year, Kyle, what would you do?
We're taking Jefferson. There's no question about it. He's the best receiver in the NFL on a really strong offense in which he is the focal point, not only the passing attack, but of the entirety of the offense. Maybe the easiest one. I think having a receiver at 101 where the bust rates of receiver being lower than running back pretty much across the board when you look at the early rounds is really nice. And it should not be taken for granted that we finally get a receiver who like legitimately projects for 1,700 yards or something as a windmill 101.
Yeah, that makes some sense. I remember I was reading in the magazine too. I think in one of Matthew Berry's stats, I believe it's on like 5 of the top 10 running backs preseason last year all end up being busts. So like, have we reached a point in your mind that it's safer to take a receiver in the first round than a running back?
I think it's pretty much always been that way. If you look at the historical data, not to say that running backs are bad picks, but they are just much more volatile picks. The best fantasy seasons in any scoring format have consistently come from running backs. Like you look at the McCaffrey season, or you look at like the all-time, like looking back to like even the LT days, the best fantasy seasons come from running back. But we are not even guaranteed to get one of those in a year, right? Like you look at, we haven't had the McCaffrey season since it happened. Like we haven't had that 2,600 yards from scrimmage, 20 touchdowns guy. It doesn't even happen every year. Whereas receivers, yeah, we literally cannot, we have never gotten at least 2,000 total yards from a receiver, but the bust rates are so much lower. So I think in your standard home league, you should not be shooting for the moon, hoping that some running back you like turns, like Bijan turns into the McCaffrey season. You're much more likely to get 1,700 yards, especially in like half PPR and full PPR from a Jamar Chase or something like that. In like tournament style leagues where like, any sort of like the NFFC, FFPC, or best ball, I think maybe you do want to be shooting for the guy who can break fantasy 10 times over, who can be this year's McCaffrey of 2020. But in your home league, like historical data shows that like the bust rates at running back are much higher, and you don't need the best team possible. You just need to beat 11 other people. So to me, I'm often, not always, but often taking like my top 4 players are all of the receivers. And then I think I go McCaffrey over Kelsey, but McCaffrey's incredible. And I have him ranked as like my 5th player, which should tell you where I'm at. And after that, it's again, we're getting to more receivers. So I don't think running backs in the first round are bad picks. And I think this year ADP has done a better job at sorting these guys out. Like I think like take this environment, but place it in our 2019 mindset. Saquon Barkley is going like 105. I don't think he should be a 105 pick, but ADP is doing a better job sorting that out. So I still think receivers in the first round, we're getting a majority receivers versus running backs or one tight end is correct. But the running backs that go in the first round are good. I don't not take McCaffrey. I don't not take Bijan. But if you look at my best ball drafts, I've taken significantly more of just blanket wide receiver position in the first round.
Yeah, I think also part of the thing I consider with this is also like sometimes like we had with Jonathan Taylor 2021, where he was basically a 2nd round pick that year, and he ends up leading the league in rushing, was a great season. Try to chase that again, I feel like it's very hard.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. And it's just like running back is just significantly more volatile. There are higher bust rates. And receiver also, I think, probably goes undersold as the fact that we can probably more easily determine talent at receiver and talent at receiver more readily predicts their fantasy production. Whereas like if, like last year, like if the 49ers, which they did at times, wanted to use Elijah Mitchell to salt away a game, they could just flip that switch. Like they can just do that. But as long as Justin Jefferson is on the field, which he is on the field until the game is 41-0, like he is going to be a target beast. So the fact that coaches can more readily put their thumb on the scale of running back, I think is part of the reason, without a doubt, that running back is a little bit more volatile of a position where like you give Justin Jefferson a shot, he's playing every snap, and he's the best player on the field.
Yeah, it certainly makes a lot of sense here. And in terms of running backs who are in your circle of trust this year, like who would you feel safest taking like in rounds 1 or 2, saying, I feel confident that this guy's going to give me what I want running back wise, point wise in fantasy?
I mean, McCaffrey for sure. You look at like his usage last year, like I think he was like pushing for 2,000 yards from scrimmage, despite even, I don't want to say missing a game, right? But he significantly played a downplayed role in that first game in San Francisco. I don't take Eckler as much as like, I don't take him in 1 out of 12 drafts. So I guess by that measure, he's probably not in the circle of trust. And Bijan is. I probably take him in like 1 out of 12 drafts. Other than that, I wouldn't say I trust anyone, though I do find myself taking a ton of Jonathan Taylor. But that's because the market is terrified. Like ADP is terrified of the risk that he isn't playing. I am very unconcerned. It's not a 0 chance, but I think it's a very small chance. So I'm not trusting him, but it's a bet on upside, and it's the perfect bet on upside. So in terms of the first 2 rounds, I literally think there are 2 running backs that I feel have a strong, safe projection. My only concern with Eckler is that his like rushing efficiency last year was pretty poor. Like he was basically a incredible receiver with great volume and a goal line role, but he dropped off as a runner a bit. I don't think that makes a huge difference, but when the opportunity cost is AJ Brown, who is historically like one of the most efficient receivers this side of the year 2000, I end up going AJ Brown more often than I go Eckler. So
yeah, in comparison, how many receivers you say in that same range of your circle of trust, like 8 or 9?
Yeah, that's probably top 4 receivers. Then AJ Brown. I take Brown over Diggs, but Diggs is in circle of trust. Yeah, like most of them are. Amon-Ra is. Devontae. Yeah, I take him because he like you shouldn't be able to get Devontae in the second round. I think that's a leak. Even though there are some risks there, that offense could be pretty bad. I think it's not a great coach team, and I don't think Devontae loves being there. He literally was like questioning his GM about like, I don't think we agree on the future of this team, but he's also like one of the best receivers of my lifetime. So yeah, most of the receivers in that range, about 8 or 9, are in the circle.
All right, that's good to know when you're playing your strategy here. And speaking of Devontae's former quarterback here, one of the big moves of the offseason is the Aaron Rodgers coming to New York to play for the Jets here. Like we know about the on-field impact. How do you feel like he's going to help impact the Jets fantasy-wise? There are a lot of years we didn't take Jets in the draft at all.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, where there was a Chiefs-Jets game. Chiefs were way underpriced for DFS, and it was like, oh, but who am I running it back with? They have cheap guys. I just want a guy with volume. They were terrible. The Chiefs boat raced them. None of their receivers were good. And the answer is you don't have to play players on bad teams. So there were absolutely years in which you did not have to draft them. This is not one of those years, obviously, but it is to show you the difference. Like there are literally years where, like you said, you just didn't, maybe don't worry about the Jets. They're not a team you really need to worry about. This is not one of those years. I think Garrett Wilson is perfectly fine at the 1-2 turn. And I think you look at how they were last year, and anytime they didn't have Zach Wilson under center, they were slinging it. I don't think they will need to or want to sling it, but they were such a conservative, terrified offense with Zach Wilson, which was a majority of their games, that even just moving away from that, even if they're still slow, which is kind of been a pretty much staple of Rodgers' career, is that he's slow. They're not a slow and they play a slow pace of like seconds per play, but they will go from being at worst, because Rodgers wasn't actually like great in efficiency stuff last year, a bottom 2 to 3 team in terms of passing efficiency, to a middle of the road team. I think there are reasons for Rodgers to be below what you would expect last year and to him rebound, i.e. losing Devontae Adams and having like really for a lot of his season, either Christian Watson not playing a full-time role or hurt entirely. And then no one, like those were the good times, was like the end stretch where Christian Watson got it going. I think it's understandable to say Rodgers had a down year and should rebound to a top 10-ish play. He's 39 or something. Maybe he isn't the MVP anymore. He doesn't have to be. The Jets were so bad last year that you get a top 10 season for the Jets and you're getting like Garrett Wilson, perfectly good pick at the 1-2, could be a guy we're taking in the top 5 next year. And even the ancillary pieces, like on my best ball teams, I take Corey Davis. It's disgusting. I take some Corey Davis. Tyler Conklin, sure, throw him on there. So I think this is a pretty easy team to target, with the exception of I still don't take Alan Lazard. I'm just not doing it with this guy.
Yeah, certainly fair. I do feel like Rodgers, a fantasy play, is interesting in terms of maybe he's a guy where like you're taking a higher upside quarterback that has a more of like a high ceiling, low floor kind of. Maybe Rodgers safer hedge bet at the quarterback position there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Anthony Richardson, goes not too awful before him. I think they're in the same range of quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson could like break football. He could rush for 1,500 yards. Like that is not out of the range of outcomes. He's the most athletic quarterback to ever enter the league per like the combine's metrics. He could also be a really bad passer, and coaches could be thinking about benching him. Whereas that's not happening with Rodgers. I don't know if we'll get the 45 touchdown season from Rodgers again, but you can kind of bookend him for 30 plus. Can't say that with Richardson. Maybe that means they're good to pair with each other, or you're even fine just taking Rodgers and shooting for upside way later in the draft. But yeah, they're just different bets, as you point out.
Yeah, for sure here. Let's go back to the running back well here. A couple of interesting things to discuss here. Number one, we recently had 2 big names in recent fantasy past find new homes. Obviously, Cook joins Rodgers with the Jets here. Ezekiel Elliott goes to New England, where he's eats into some of the Ramondre Stevenson's workload here. If like you had to put your chip on one of those guys, I'd rather have this guy on my team. Who would you pick?
Based on what it's going to cost to draft him, give me Zeke, because I think there's a decent chance, there is a chance, it's not a great chance, that Zeke is actually a meaningful goal line contributor throughout the season. Like he was fine in success rate last year, meaning that like he basically got what was asked of him, which when you're at the goal line, and like Stevenson wasn't actually great in that metric. He was a good breakaway runner, but he was a little boom bust, at least to the level of like his highs were high, but he was only average if you're just looking at like median, right? So Zeke could actually be brought in, and as they're trying to maximize what skills he has left, as a goal line player, and he's not going to be super expensive to draft, whereas Cook is expensive to draft, and he had good top end speed, but he wasn't even great in like rush yards over expected. He wasn't good in success rate. Like he's showing a lot of signs of decline. And last year, Breece Hall, I mean, I think he was a shoo-in for offensive rookie of the year up until he got hurt. Like he was pacing for an incredible season, and that's coming off the back of an incredible college profile. I think by week 10, 11, 12, Breece is probably just dusting Dalvin Cook. Like we're just not talking about him anymore. And if that's probably also true of Zeke. I think the medium outcome is also that Zeke is dusted off at some point and is not playing much, but I'll take the cheaper one. And I think that also is even more likely to get Dalvin Cook not playing much or not have a useful role. He's getting some carries where he can break long runs from the 50-yard line, but he's not going to be a goal line back. He's not going to be a pass catcher, whereas at least Zeke can be a goal line back. And I don't really want either of these guys, so just give me the cheaper one.
Yeah, it makes some sense. I feel like Cook's probably end up sort of being the Latavian Tomlinson 2010 era pickup for the Jets, where he has a complimentary role and sort of fades in the background.
Yes, I'm going to use that reference now.
Yeah, it's a great call there, and the Patriots situation point out here. Plus, Bill Belichick is the original like I screw with running backs fantasy value by just rotating them in and out here, and they don't trust Mac Jones to throw. I think that is probably the safer call.
Yeah, I like that. I'm stealing that Latavian Tomlinson thing.
Go for it by all means, and we'll go to another running back here. The leading rusher last year, Josh Jacobs, currently holding out for the Raiders here, and we don't know as of recording time he's going to show up in time for the regular season. We can try and sit some games out because the running back feel like not getting paid enough here. There is risk here because obviously people remember 2018 Le'Veon Bell, like sat out, took him early, got nothing from him, sat out the whole year. Like, where do you feel comfortable drafting Josh Jacobs?
I think his ADP right now is fine in that like late second round type of range, because I think his odds of holding out into the season are extremely low. He would double his career earnings just about by playing this year on the franchise tag. And he's not a young back. He's coming off of like, was he 4 years in the NFL now? Like he's 25 or 6, I think. The like average Cliff Ray running back is 27. He would be coming very close to this being like, he would sit out a year, which is not going to help the contract he gets next offseason, and he will be a year older having not played football. Like, I think it would be a really risky strategy for him. Probably just as much risk to not play this year as it would be to understandably say, I'm not going to get hurt, because that is the risk he's trying to avoid, obviously, is I don't want to get hurt without a long-term guarantee. But he's hurting his future earnings. Like, he's taking some money off the top if he chooses not to play. I think he chooses to play. I think it's all but a foregone conclusion that he eventually plays. And to me, the biggest concern last year is that he was really good, but they did not use a single other back. Like Zamir White was pitching in nothing. Amir Abdul was pitching in nothing. If they change that up at all this year, that's going to come out of the bottom line of Josh Jacobs. He was still really good last year, so I'm fine taking him at ADP. Not like a massive target for me, though.
I could definitely see that scenario, especially considering he's not at camp. All the other guys are at camp. Mo takes the coach there and say, "Oh, we like this guy. I'll give him a role even when Josh is here."
Yeah, let's give Amir Abdul some more third downs. Zamir White can actually handle a little more than we thought. He looked fine in preseason, whereas we got nothing out of Zamir White last year. So I'm not like high on Zamir White by any means. He's a fine like late round stash, I guess, but it's more so that he played like nothing. He literally didn't play last year, and going from nothing to 25% of the snaps, you will immediately notice that when your fantasy points box score from Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And obviously, one thing I like to look at when I'm in the fantasy draft is like, obviously, you have your slots 1 to 12 in a snake draft. It goes back and forth here. The first round here, like, where you feel that line is where, like, you're sitting there, you have the toughest choice to make in round 1.
I think it's 7, assuming people draft what I would do, which is the top 4 receivers, Hill, Cup, Jefferson, Chase in reverse order, and then Travis Kelce, and then Christian McCaffrey. I don't quibble with the order too much outside of Jefferson, Chase as the top 2. After that, I don't go McCaffrey 3 or go him 6. Doesn't make a big difference to me. After that, once you get to Eckler, who probably has like the highest median projection there on out, or AJ Brown, who is, I think he's as talented roughly as like Chase Jefferson. Like you look at his efficiency stuff, you look at his like 538 metrics, he is up there with the best of them. His offense just doesn't pass as much, but that ensures you such a high floor. But then Stephon Diggs probably plays on a team that passes more and is really good as well. I think there's a hard choice there. Even Bijan, I think is the best running back prospect since Saquon. If you thought he was better than Saquon, I would not blame you. I think that is like a perfectly defensible take. And he plays on a team that got such good rushing production last year out of like literally Caleb Huntley was like really efficient. Obviously not limited to Cordero Patterson being really efficient and Tyler Algier being extremely efficient. Like not to say those guys aren't good, but the scheme is really good too. If you can parlay all 3 of those guys being good, efficient runners, it tells you something about the scheme. Put Bijan Robinson, who is better than those guys, in that scheme and will probably get used more as a pass catcher, at least than Algier, but he could even be like an elite pass catcher. I really like that guy. There is a hard choice here. Whereas in the top 6, it's a hard choice, but it's one where I don't think you can go wrong. I think you could go wrong at this next spot of these 4 guys.
Yeah, it's certainly fair here. And you brought that Atlanta team too. I did want to touch on that real quick here. They're like, I know Bijan's gonna go very high, but like certain amount of like freak athletes they have on that offense. If they get anything out of Desmond Ridder, that could be a fun offense you want to have a stake of on your team at some point, in my opinion.
I think it's easy for me to like them because I'm not too concerned with what Tyler Algier is going to do. Like you look at guys who go as high as Bijan with profiles as good as Bijan, they come in the league and they're a good bet to lead the league in rushing. Like you saw Zeke lead the league in rushing as a rookie. Saquon came close as a rookie. Like these guys get used literally more than any other back. Like the league leading rushers come in the first 2 years of his career and like half of the past like 15 league leading rushers. So to me, the rushing work and the pass catching work out of the backfield is very consolidated to one guy. The pass catching work to the receivers / tight ends is very consolidated to 2 guys. So if you get the bet right on the offense being better than expected, you know who the winners are. I don't have to think about like, what if Trevor Lawrence turns into Joe Burrow? Oh, was that because Calvin Ridley was better? Or did it distribute to like Evan Ingram spike games? No, I don't have to worry about that. There are 2 pass catchers and 1 running back who benefit. Makes it a very easy bet to make. And it's one that I make fairly often.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, let's go to the core acquisition as well, because obviously you know who your big guys are there, but like they cost a lot in terms of draft position here. You can try and go like lower value in terms of like weighing out guys. Like, what's your strategy to taking the quarterback in fantasy this year?
Yeah, I feel like the biggest edge for me is avoiding that middle zone of quarterbacks. Maybe Anthony Richardson is sort of the one quarterback I make an exception for. But if I'm not getting probably out to Lamar Jackson, I take Justin Herbert sometimes and Trevor Lawrence less so. But if I'm not getting out to like a top 5 quarterback, I think the difference between Dak and Kirk and looking down to Brock Purdy or whatever is probably overblown in that it just doesn't manifest in a ton of points per game. the difference between an elite Lamar Jackson season and even Trevor Lawrence, who only goes, 3 quarterbacks after him, that could be huge. I do think you want to be taking stabs there. The difference between Patrick Mahomes throwing for 5,050, that can meaningfully make a difference between that guy and Kirk Cousins. I don't think Kirk Cousins can put that level of distance between himself and even like Mac Jones or whatever. He'll be better than Mac Jones, but not by a way that is priced into his cost. Whereas I think, are roughly appropriately pricing that for the elite quarterbacks. The elite quarterbacks are as easy to pick out as it has ever been, particularly because they're good rushers, but also I think some of them are just so incredibly talented that it's so apparent. So to me, if I don't get a top 5 guy, I will literally just platoon total jabronis.
Yeah, where's your spot you want to take those top 5 guys? Like round 3 is the highest you feel like?
Yeah, I know in DraftKings some of them will go round 2. I don't get a ton of them, which is frustrating, but that's because I think they're a little overpriced. So I think round 3 is probably where I'm looking to get them. I think the underdog pricing has that more correct. Frankly, I think they'll probably go I think DraftKings will be one of the highest spots you are taking quarterbacks, and I think that's wrong. I think even in your home leagues, you'll be able to get one of them, maybe not your choice, but one of them in the 3rd round.
All right, let's go to the tight end spot. It's always the hardest spot to fill in a fantasy starting lineup here because obviously, you're taking Travis Kelce in round 1. Maybe you're taking Mark Andrews at the 2-3 turn here. Like, you don't get one of those 2 guys. Like, and you have to prioritize them if you want them. Like, how are you dealing with this position?
I was gonna say I'm a little more willing to wade into that middle ground, but I don't actually think that's true. I think it's basically the same. I said there are probably 5, maybe 6 quarterbacks that I think have the chance to be the QB1 overall. Throw Travis Kelce to the conversation because I think he's such a prohibitive. He's going to be the tight end 1 overall. But I think there are also 5 or 6 tight ends that have a chance to be the tight end 2 overall. Assuming Kelce stays healthy, I'm just going to pencil him in at 1. Mark Andrews the favorite, but we've seen George Kittle be the way I talked about AJ Brown is like, if you look at like yards per route run or the 538 metrics, he's like one of the best receivers, like literally maybe the best receiver of the past 20 years. George Kittle is that guy. He has 2 of the best seasons in yards per route run since PFF has tracked that kind of data. He's like extreme spike week potential. And then Kyle Pitts had one of the best, basically the 2nd best rookie season for a tight end ever. And last year was terrible, but he was also banged up playing on a bad offense. I don't want to say I'm willing to write it off, but I'm also willing to acknowledge that his rookie season was as literally almost as good as it could possibly get. So I'm willing to wade into that group. I find myself taking less Darren Waller just because he's old, coming off of injury, switching teams. He's fine though. He could be that guy. But to me, it's more so Kittle and Pitts, where I think they're strong bets to make the jump. And then after that, I don't like, what's the difference between Evan Ingram and Sam Laporta, Evan Ingram and Hunter Henry? He's better. He'll score more points. Does that make much of a difference versus the 2v2 you get of going a receiver or a breakout running back there? To me, no. So it's, once again, if I don't get truly the best guys, I'm not getting a middle range guy. I just don't think those guys are difference makers. But I have been more selective with tight end. I do find myself actually saying, like, I'm going to take a stand on Kyle Pitts this year. Whereas quarterback, it could be Lamar, it could be Fields, it could even be Herbert. I don't have the strongest opinions there. I found myself having a bit more of a take at tight ends.
So basically, once you get past that top 4-ish, and it's probably like you're getting, I think, round 6, you probably have to take those 4 guys. You're fine waiting until like the end of the draft for like a David Njoku or some tight end X on some random team just to fill the slot.
Yeah, I'll literally take I'll be the last person to take tight end if I don't, like, last round, last tight end off the board. Because like Michael Mayer is going to play a ton of snaps. Luke Musgrave is going to play a ton of snaps. Hunter Henry has like been clearly running as the tight end 1. They don't seem to have any interest in playing Mike Gesicki ahead of him. You're getting a lot of routes from him. Even Hayden Hurst. Like, I don't think Hayden Hurst is very good. He's playing all the snaps, and the team he's going on is getting a lot better from last year to this year. Any of those guys are fine in that I don't think they score a ton of points, but I don't think Evan Ingram scores a ton of points either. Give me a chance at a breakout running back or the next star receiver at the Evan Ingram price. Whereas you're probably not getting that guy where Michael Mayer goes.
Yeah, certainly fair here. Two last things before we wrap here. Obviously, everybody loves their sleepers here. I'm sure you have a couple in mind. Who are some of the sleepers you're targeting in drafts?
He's going to be rising up boards. I want to be drafting as much Marvin Mims as I can. He had an elite profile coming out of college. I mean, he had one of the better freshman seasons you'll ever find. So I find myself taking a lot of him, even as his price has risen post Tim Patrick injury. And Jalen Warren, not super deep cuts, but Najee has just been so incredibly inefficient through 2 years. And we saw last year, it did not take long of Warren showing them he's got juice for them to start giving him snaps. And I think we've seen this training camp and even in their preseason game, which I don't want to read too much into, but it's a data point that they seem to be continually willing to see what Warren can do for them over Najee. So probably two of my highest drafted players, and I don't see that changing.
All right, that's cool. Let's go the other way. Who are some guys you're avoiding right now if you had your way with the board?
Well, I won't talk about Najee, but I think he's dreadfully inefficient, and I'm worried that Warren is just straight up better than him. Christian Kirk, I think it's really weird that people are getting extremely excited about Calvin Ridley, but not sort of connecting the dot that if Calvin Ridley is going to come in and be a really strong pass catching option, the targets have to come from someone. I don't think it's that they're sure, some of them come from the third receiver, Marvin Jones, but I think more so it's coming off of a pretty even split between Zay Jones and Christian Kirk. Whereas you look at last year, their weighted opportunity ratings, just weighting targets and air yards on those targets, were pretty similar. Christian Kirk didn't put a meaningful distance in terms of opportunity between him and Zay Jones. So when I'm, plotting out my target shares, I'm not going to say Zay Jones is a 12% target share guy and Kirk remains at 26. I'm docking them both relatively evenly. But their prices aren't docked evenly. Kirk is still expensive, whereas Zay Jones is very cheap, fantasy role player type of guy for your fantasy team. I think they both kind of end up looking like that. And even more importantly, Kirk in their first preseason game only played in 3 wide. He was like a slot only guy. So I think Kirk is one of the more mispriced receivers in a bad way right now.
Absolutely, Kyle. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. If you want to follow your fantasy covers throughout the season, how can they do that?
Yeah, follow me at Kyle Tweets here. I tweet out everything I do, or check out the Roto World Draft Guide.